The UFC has seen its fair share of hype trains, from Conor McGregor to Darren Till to Khamzat Chimaev. Some of them work out and become champions, some of them have very respectable careers, and some of them crash and burn, or quite literally, hype trains derailed. So today, we're going to take a look at the most notable failed UFC hype trains. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. First on my list of failed hype trains worth noting is Darren Till. His career record is 18-5-1. He is still active. He's actually boxing on the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson card. He could return to MMA. He said that he has a wish to return to MMA. We'll see if that happens, but he's currently boxing. He's not an active MMA fighter. His notable bad losses, where he got absolutely dominated or KO'd, include Dricus du Plessis, Derek Brunson, Tyron Woodley, and Jorge Masvidal. Now, specifically what happened with Darren Till, he was a huge star. He was undefeated. He got rushed to a title shot, and he fought Tyron Woodley at 170. Tyron Woodley was a dominant champ at the time. He got rushed before he was ready, and Tyron Woodley absolutely dominated him. Darren Till was not ready for this opportunity. So that got compounded by the Jorge Masvidal KO, which in my opinion was a result of him cutting too much weight to make 170. There's many videos out there of Darren Till almost dying, it seems like, to make 170 pounds. And so he cut too much weight. That must have been very draining on him mentally and physically. Then he loses the title fight to Tyron Woodley, and he gets knocked out by Jorge Masvidal. And at this point, he has such terrible confidence issues. And he, like you said, he was afraid to go out there for one of his fights. And this got even further compounded by him, honestly, not being cut out for middleweight. He's one of those guys where he's way too big for 170, but he's not strong enough, not muscular enough for 185. He's somebody that could benefit from a 175 division. I've made videos about potential new divisions in the UFC. He's somebody that could benefit from welterweight being 175 pounds instead of 170, but he wasn't cut out for middleweight, and that was shown. He got absolutely dominated at middleweight. He was absolutely bullied by Dricus du Plessis and Derek Brunson, and his only win was a split decision over Kelvin Gastelum, who also is a former welterweight, so a relatively small middleweight. So 185 is not his weight class, 170 is not his weight class. He's just one of those guys where a 175 would benefit him a lot, and his confidence issues and his weak grappling led to the downfall of Darren Till's hype train. Moving down from there, we have Sage Northcutt, who is still active in one championship. His career record was 12-3. Notable UFC losses to Bryan Barberena and Mickey Gall, which are not, these are terrible losses to have on your record. Bryan Barberena is not in the UFC anymore, and Mickey Gall has a career record of 7-5. Honestly, his Mickey Gall's most notable career moment is beating CM Punk. And what really happened was that he was young, very young for the people that he was fighting. He hadn't fully grown into his mature body, in my opinion. He wanted to explore free agency, and he also got the blackball, not cut out to be a fighter line from Dana White, and he wanted to explore free agency to make more money, and then Dana White says he's not cut out to be a fighter. He ends up in one championship and gets a win, but then he actually fractures his skull in a fight in one championship, which led to a 4-year layoff. He came back, got a win, and then in his what was supposed to be his most recent fight for one championship, there was some weirdness where one championship said that his coaches would be all right, but when they actually got to Singapore, he was notified, if I remember correctly, he was notified that his coaches were not given work visas, they were given tourist visas, and that they would be arrested if they were caught working on camera, which would be coaching Sage Northcutt. So he pulled out of his fight just hours before the fight, and he did leave. He did make a very scathing explanation on his Instagram of what happened. So we'll see if he has a job with one championship going forward. Moving on from there, we have Gregor Gillespie, who is 14-1. He might be retired. I don't think he has an interest in fighting anymore, but he has not officially announced his retirement. He was an amazing college wrestler, some of the best wrestling in MMA. He had incredible potential. He has a nasty head kick KO loss to Kevin Lee. And then he sits around calling for a Tony Ferguson matchup for over a year and essentially ends his career because he didn't get a Tony Ferguson matchup, even though Tony was already on the slide too. This one's really confusing. He could have been one of the best. People talked about him being able to challenge Khabib in the wrestling department, and he's just not interested in fighting anymore. I looked at his Instagram. He's very inactive on there. He still trains. So I'm not really sure. This one's really confusing to me. Maybe he makes a comeback, maybe he's done, but genuinely very confusing derailed hype train for Gregor Gillespie. He's not even that old. It's weird. It's weird. So Gregor Gillespie wasn't like a huge fraud check. He got KO'd and then wanted one particular matchup, didn't get it, and then just moved on, I guess. It's weird. Moving on from there, we have the only female fighter on the list, Paige VanZant. She retired from MMA with a career record of 8-5. She was highly valued by the UFC at the same time as Sage Northcutt. And in the same way, she got rushed to some big matchups that she wasn't cut out for. She got rushed to some very big matchups. She lost to Rose Namajunas, Amanda Hebos, Tisha Torres, now Tisha Pennington, and Michelle Waterson-Gomez. And she even lost to Jessica Rose Clark, who also very low-level UFC fighter who's not even in the promotion anymore. But, what happened to Paige VanZant was she was never UFC-level talent at all. I mean, just being honest. She was rushed to elite opponents like Amanda Hebos, Rose Namajunas, Tisha Torres, very experienced, highly ranked fighters. And what happened to her? I mean, she makes easier money outside of fighting. Most of you guys know what I'm talking about, but she makes much easier money doing non-fighting things. And even though she has a boxing match booked coming up soon, but money grab type of thing. And I can't blame her. Fighting's got to be probably the hardest way to make money, and she's doing something easier than that. And she wasn't all that good at fighting anyway. So, hers was a very quickly derailed hype train and far less confusing than someone like Gregor Gillespie. Moving on from there, we have Ben Askren, who has a career record of 19-2 with 1 no contest. He is retired now. And he was involved in the trade from the UFC, or from one championship to the UFC for Demetrius Johnson. And honestly, he had a great career outside of the UFC, but he did get absolutely fraud checked in the UFC, and it made promotions like Bellator and One Championship look very uncompetitive to the UFC, or compared to the UFC, because he lost. He had such an incredible career outside of the UFC, and then came and was immediately derailed as a hype train. He lost to Jorge Masvidal in probably the most highlight reel KO of all time, or he lost to Damian Maia. What happened? He came to the UFC far too late. He was older, just past his prime. His striking never evolved. His elite wrestling that was enough for him in other promotions just didn't cut it in the UFC. His striking was so terrible to where his world-class wrestling couldn't bail him out. And then after that, he retires because he was older, gets the bag from Jake Paul. He gets a hip replacement, and now he plays disc golf. So that's what happened to Ben Askren. Went from elite boogeyman outside of the UFC type fighter to getting absolutely fraud checked and moving on from the sport. And now the very last person on here I have is Edmen Shahbazyan. He is active in the UFC middleweight division at 13-4. He had notable losses. His 4 losses are Derek Brunson, Jack Hermanson, Nasruddin Imavov, and Anthony Hernandez, who are all ranked middleweights right now, except for Derek Brunson, who retired as a ranked middleweight. Or, he's in PFL, but retired as a ranked middleweight. And what happened? He's young. He's 26. He got rushed to elite competition at like 22, 23 years old. He struggles in the grappling department. And he just got outclassed by stronger people. And that's what happens like with Sage Northcutt too. When you're 22 years old, we saw it with Raul Rosas too. When you're 18, 20, 22, and you get rushed to elite competition, they're just physically more developed than you, and they will muscle you around in the grappling or KO you if they catch you on the chin. But the positive, this is the only positive, is that he's not completely derailed as a hype train. He's only 26 years old. He's almost basically my age, and he can still become elite. He's coming off of an impressive win, gritty win. And this is not necessarily the end for Edmen Shahbazyan. He still has a chance to become ranked, possibly be a champ one day. He does have elite striking. So there are my UFC hype trains that were derailed. The only positive note on one of them is that Edmen Shahbazyan can still become elite. So there's my hype trains derailed from the UFC. If there's anybody I left out, let me know down in the comments and let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you want access to extra content aside from my regular videos, click the link in the description down below to become a channel member and get access to members-only live streams and other bonus perks. Or click the join button on our channel homepage. And if you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, check out my weekly podcast, the Hissyfit podcast, and check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World. I'll have them both linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and I'll see you next time.